Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Hey, everyone. Welcome. We have a great guest today, Rochelle Calvert, Ph.D. She's a certified in a variety of mindfulness, meditation, and trauma healing practices and is the founder and clinical director of New Mindful Life. She lives in San Diego, California, and there's more information at newmindfullife.com. She's also the author of Healing with Nature, nature-based mindfulness and somatic meditations to heal trauma. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
For those that don't know, can you just define what somatic is, somatic healing, or what somatic practitioners do?
Yeah, definitely. So somatic healing, the word somatic derives from the word soma, the body. So it's really body healing practices, or allowing ourselves to really wake up to the body in a particular way to help us know what is the body storing, what is it not allowing us to kind of feel our full aliveness in, which often happens with trauma. So this actually, somatic healing comes from somatic experiencing therapies, which have been around for 30 plus years now, developed by Peter Levine, where he really explored and examined, and there's been a lot of research to follow this up since then, of when we go through difficult events, traumatic events, a lot of times our nervous system doesn't get a chance to regulate, to restore itself to its homeostatic sense of well-being. And as a result, it becomes stuck in the body. So when we're practicing somatic healing, we're learning how to become present to the body in a particular way to help work with what's stuck and to ultimately be able to learn how to release it so we can feel more alive and embodied in our well-being.
I have a friend who had some major trauma growing up, and this was really helpful to them in immense ways. So I'm very curious about it. Now, you're talking to someone who I live in the middle of hundreds of thousands of acres of state park and, mountains. So and I grew up in downtown Chicago. So I grew up with, when I look back, a very fight or flight type of deal, always watching your back, a lot of white noise. And I think that in itself was a little dramatic when I look back at the rough city I grew up in. So I think that's why I tend to be like, I just want to be in nature 24/7.
Yeah.
There's that. But tell us, how does nature help heal one from trauma?
Yeah. This kind of dates back to when I first started exploring different practices to heal trauma, for my own self, but also for my clients, and realizing that, a lot of the different modalities out there, very helpful, very supportive. But I realized that, as we get a little airplane noise with that, but I realized that, all of those skills, techniques, practices, ways to heal were helpful, but they took a lot of work. And there was a real concentrated attention that had to happen to support that. And I realized when I started taking myself and my client outside and just got into the container of nature, nature's invitation to our nervous system is to relax, to reset, just like you were describing about that difference between Chicago and now being where you are. We're wired to want to be at ease in nature. So if we're going to do this deep healing, why not give ourselves a place that actually facilitates more ease to do this difficult work and begin to turn towards it with more support? And there are ways with these practices to bring in the support of nature, to allow nature to also not only provide the container for the healing, but to aid in the healing.
It just brings me back to my expertise and experience with being, interested in ancestral health, paleo-primal living. And, we didn't really hunker down and start building mass things until 10,000 years ago. We've been evolving for 2.5. It's our nature to be in nature, right? And so it's interesting to me because I'm a big hiker. I love being in the mountains. And I have a couple of friends who are, can be homebodies or just go to the gym. And even though sometimes they reluctantly will come out for a hike, you can just see their vibration change as we're in it. And I will also say that for me, as I've gone through challenges like anyone in life, when I go out into nature, particularly when I'm up on a perspective, like a mountain overlooking,
Yep.
it's just, it's like, I can't tell you how many things have been sort of solved and soothed. And I wish more people would get out there and do it. And I know everyone doesn't have the opportunity necessarily where they live. I guess what I'd like to ask you, and this is what I suggest to other people sometimes is, I know it may not be like the real thing, but there are beautiful nature visuals on YouTube, right? Free like drone footage. And sometimes even though I live in beauty, I will turn it on and have it on silent in the background and just watch a beach. And it just, God, it does the trick sometimes. So if someone's not near nature or has to drive far to get out into it and can't every day, maybe, get into it, what are some ways that they can foster that environment other than maybe what I just said?
Yeah. Yeah. I really invite people to remember that we are connected to nature in actually every moment. So the houses that we live in, even if we're living in the concrete jungle, the concrete is made of the earth. And how can we actually reflect and sense that when I'm stepping on the concrete, I'm actually stepping in and with the earth, right? And these practices, if we really begin to get into our bodies, get into the sense of how we can wake up to what's here and take care of it, we have more of that ability to feel like, oh, wow, there is nature here. And even if we can't feel because it's, more man-made and kind of transformed out of its original nature, the boards and things of our house, we can simply open the window and look up. Right? Everyone can open the window or, take a step outside in the concrete jungle and look up. Right? The sky is always there. There is a vista for us to look at. We just have to incline our attention that way. And even if we have a small house plant, right? Or we let ourselves just connect when we're out walking, maybe in a more urban setting, to the trees that are there, right? They are planted. They've rooted themselves in the midst of those places. And what better teachers for us to actually become more present to and practice these ways of healing with, to learn from them. They're growing amidst all of that challenge, strain, and struggle equally in the ways that we're trying to do in our lives too. And I think there's beautiful ways to practice in less, full 360 kind of nature experiences. We just have to really kind of deepen our sense of presence to actually remember what all of this is actually of nature.
I love that perspective. I never thought about it that way. The doctor on my first book, Dr. Gary Forsman, has seen several of my friends over the years who are like, hey, I want to see your doctor. And he's very spiritual and, understands a lot of the things you've probably written about. And so that makes him very unique. And everyone's gotten a different, opinion from him. He's not cookie cutter. And one of my friends who was in a stressful job, commuting 2 hours a day, he told my friend, you know what, you need to ground yourself. I don't care if you have to just go take your feet out and stand in grass. And I thought that was at the time, I remember being like, oh, that's interesting. And I thought, well, he never said that to me, and probably just because I'm in nature all the time. But I thought that was interesting that he said this. And then the pandemic happened and my friend got to work at home and we were going on all these walks. There was nothing else to do. So it was just like every day we're in nature. He came to my neighborhood, which is in the mountains. His headaches started to get better. His health was better. His outlook was better. You could just feel the anxiety lessen. And I looked at him and I said, oh my gosh, you've been grounded. It is amazing. I've actually seen it, firsthand. There's little traumas, big traumas. Let's talk about some of the types of traumas that these healing practices, that somatic healing best supports.
Yeah. So that's another thing in the writing of this book and the conversations that I'm hoping to have with people like yourself and just anyone who's willing to have it, is that this way we view trauma, I think, is sometimes limiting. And there's, a thing in the field where we talk about the big T, the classically defined traumas like being at war and in serious natural disasters, physical or sexual assault experiences. And then there's the little T's, the things that, there was a difficult emotional experience or a different relational experience or a loss that we had. And I really want to move away from the definition of needing to make it a big or a little, and that we just start learning to identify for ourselves what we've experienced as trauma. because really we can, have many people go through what would be a similar trauma and have very different outcomes. And so if we start realizing that really the definition of trauma could maybe just be, we went through a distressing or a difficult event in our lives. And we can define that in lots of different ways, right? The pandemic being one of them, the climate crisis being another, right? There's lots of different distressing events that land in our nervous systems and kind of overwhelm our ability to cope. And they ultimately leave us feeling like we just can't get back to that baseline, to that sense of restoration and well-being that we know is available. But because the event was so distressing and so overwhelming to our nervous systems to get through it, it's stuck in the nervous system. So we are unable to get back to that homeostasis and well-being. So when you start to look at that as the definition, you can open this to anything in your life that you've experienced that might fit within that category, and begin to look at it as a way to start honoring for you, not what a big T or a little t classifies trauma as, but actually that has been traumatic for you. It was a wound, it was a challenge, it was an experience that your nervous system, your being went through, and rightfully deserves to have your presence, attention, and healing with it. So I would invite, really, the short answer to that is just what the person themselves defines as trauma, and the desire to want to heal and find a healthier and wholer sense of well-being with it.
On that note, and maybe there's some ways you could expand on this, but just thinking about, so for example, like in the health world, we, are always talking about like stress management, right? And ways to mitigate that. And so many of my clients over the years who are type A, go, right? They often, when I bring this up, will be like, well, I mean, I'm busy and stuff, but I mean, it's all good stuff. And so I think sometimes even though their adrenals are on fire, right? And so sometimes it's like, we don't even recognize that we're stressed. You get what I'm saying? I don't know if you could expand on that at all, but that's always an interesting one, because people are like, yeah, but it's all good. And you're like, yeah, but you're multitasking at 100 miles an hour and your heart rate's up. Yeah.
Well, and you're overwhelming your nervous system's ability to manage. It's not going to perform for you in the way that it can. You could even see that as traumatic, that we've adapted this way of patterning ourselves to get through life that actually just keeps us on the go, and that assaults the nervous system, right? And it's not letting us create a sense of well-being, and creates all other kinds of consequences in that direction. And so learning to identify that, what are the patterns that I'm kind of gravitating towards in my life to just cope and get through with whatever it is that's going on, the difficult events or the way I've designed my life, that don't allow me to fully be in my life. It's kind of like the patterns are ultimately running the life. And like you started the conversation today with, that sense of kind of always being in the fight, flight, and I would add freeze, right? Response. Our nervous systems, when they're in that state, regardless of whether it's the difficulties in the life that we've experienced or just the way we've kind of, created a lot of activity in our life, none of those are good for our sense of well-being. And learning how to change our relationship to those and ultimately get them back into the place where they're needed, meaning we use them when we need them and we turn them off when we need them, and get that sense of restoration back into the body. That's where that fuller sense of well-being comes.
Aside from what you might have already mentioned, maybe we can go a little bit deeper on how nature, mindfulness, and somatic healing really do help to resolve trauma. I'm assuming, obviously, the nervous system, great sensories. What are some other things we haven't mentioned that are involved in this?
Yeah. So I like to look at each one of those, mindfulness, somatic, and nature, as ecosystems of healing. Each one of them has respective ways that we can practice and we can connect to that allow their healthy ecosystems of healing, right? We know we already talked about somatic healing. That's its own ecosystem of healing practices. Mindfulness has been out there, well, for thousands of years, but we've really been, integrating it here in the West for the last 40 or so. And then nature, like you said, like we've been wired for this, as it's our DNA is designed to be in relationship with nature. So when we start to look at each one of those in their own right, and then what I'm pointing to in the book is learning how to bring them all together so that we can begin to let those ecosystems of healing heal our own inner ecosystems that's so dysregulated from whatever it is we're struggling with. So some practices that looks like is, in the first section of the book, we're really exploring mindfulness itself with nature, not practicing in the indoor location, getting your body outside, sitting with the senses, right? I'm on this conversation with you in the canyon that I live in, and I spend a lot of time practicing and being present out here just to let my senses be awakened and supported. And so we can learn how to practice being present to the senses, to our bodies, to the elements that are out here, like learning how to really feel that all of the elements, the earth, the fire, the air, the water, are all here around us, but they're also within us too. And there are practices that we can learn how to really feel into our sensory, our physical, our elemental awareness within ourselves with the support of nature. And then we layer that further as we explore later in the book, how to do that with trauma and through the somatic healing practices and weaving that together with nature. And then as all of those start to kind of, through different forms of practice, come together, we're starting to wake up and go, oh, look at that. I don't want to be so busy all of a sudden. And like you said with your friend, it's like all of a sudden he's just like naturally kind of falling into a more grounded sense of well-being. And so it's all using these different ways to support our healing and bringing them into our own nervous systems and sense of capacity to heal. We're able to find that like alive and more vibrant self that is in there, just sometimes gets covered up by all the stuff that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience where, so I love nature. I live in the middle of it, but I was also traumatized by it because in 2018, I live in the middle of 100,000 acres that burned in Malibu.
Yeah.
And so for a while, it was really rough. My whole neighborhood got torched. It was just like apocalyptic to look at all of the black dirt mountains. It just was out of a movie. And it was scary, the whole evacuation thing. I mean, everything was extremely traumatic. I had, some PTSD from it. And it was weird because I felt like this thing that I love had hurt me, so I had this weird, and yet I didn't want to leave it, but I kind of felt like, oh shit, do I have to go? And now, granted, there's still a level of awareness, we have to be aware for the alerts that come in. I actually was on a podcast not too long ago, and there was a fire a couple blocks away, and I had to pause it and to make sure that I didn't have to leave. And so it was rough because in that moment, it just, I got sparked and I had to bring myself down. Oddly enough, though, after the initial stage of this trauma, I started to go out in nature more and actually was healed by the thing that had kind of hurt me. It was such a weird contrast.
Yes.
And while I still am aware, and maybe I'm a little bit more alert about these things now that has happened, I've learned some stuff, like I'll never probably drive home without a full tank of gas again, right? And things that you learn during the trauma, like just basics. I also still love where I live. And part of it's a little tough because I don't like to be under this threat that we have here in California. But at the same time, I don't want to leave it either. So, it's kind of been an interesting experience for me in that way.
Yeah. I think such a beautiful way that you're allowing yourself to heal with what caused the disruption, right?
Right.
That there's in the healing practices, when we're really beginning to move and explore how to transform trauma, seminal piece to that process is to learn how to move towards the trauma safely and to be able to feel how that's, stuck in the body, stuck in the way that our minds are viewing it and the way that our hearts are experiencing it. And there's a chapter actually in the book called Moving Towards the Trauma. And we think that somehow, like a lot of times when we do go through distressing things like you just described, the impulse is to get far, far away, right? To go away from more of that happening, right? We think we'll create the conditions that if we just use the avoidance mechanisms or the flee mechanisms or the, all those other mechanisms that when we go through something difficult, we do to just get through because we don't have any other way. But ultimately what we're reestablishing is a sense of being able to just go towards that. And I think the fires in California, if we've lived in them and with them happening in our lives, they are immediately in our environment for us to learn how to sit with and to be present with, and to feel how the body reacts to that, and to learn how to reestablish in this moment the regulation, reestablish the healthy impulses that need to move through the body so that we can restore a sense of excitement and health about our lives and where we live. And as you were sharing the story of a dear friend who was involved in the Santa Cruz fires that were happening last year, and thankfully her particular road was saved, but everything around it was completely, blackened and turned. And deep practice and also mindfulness teacher. And she shared about a month or two after, as she was walking through all of the charred woods that, she's in love with those redwoods, as she should be. She's lived with them for many years. And she could see the rebirth happening. And it reminded her that she could rebirth too. And didn't want to leave this land, even though there was, a lot of people trying to figure out what was next because of the potential danger there. So, and it was because we moved closer to it. We didn't get away from it. We chose to be present with and let our whole being have a chance to reorganize and decide what's really truly in my better interest here, not just in the survival modes that kind of got overactivated and imprinted down to try to survive out of that situation. We don't need to carry them forward. We only needed them in that moment. And as long as that happened, great. But how do we get back to the baseline? And that's what we're working with when those experiences happen. So really beautiful that you found a way to connect to the land, even amidst all of that happening, and support that healing in that way.
And in a way, even though it was black dirt there for a while, then we had some rain. And then it was like, I've never seen such beauty in my life where I live because of all of that fresh ground and the green. It looked like the hills of Ireland. Like it just was so beautiful. And also in a way, it was like, oh, this is good. Good strip up, clean up. Let's Mother Nature doing this thing. I was able to see it from a different perspective.
And it's such a great metaphor for what happens with trauma too. Like when we really get in and we are willing to kind of do the work to burn and get it through our nervous systems in a healthier way, the meadows and brilliance of Ireland can show up, but we don't think a lot of times that our trauma has that potential in it, but it really does. If we can learn to have a healing and transformational relationship to it with these practices, it actually can become a beautiful, beautiful wellspring of growth and way to live alive in your life.
Now, you mentioned your friend in the redwoods. What are some other stories of some 180 turnarounds on trauma that persisted until someone adopted this philosophy of being mindful in nature? I'd love to hear some of these healing stories that you've experienced with other people, because I know it's always inspiring to others.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in the book, probably almost every chapter, maybe not all of them, there's some offering that I'm giving about shares around client experiences and things that they've been able to share and bear witness to through the practices to transform their trauma. But one that comes to mind is I have a client who presented for challenges around dealing with a sexual assault history. And really, in his case, was feeling the big T-ness of that and how it was really impacting a lot of areas in his life. And as we worked together and did these practices out in nature and somatically and mindfully, he actually, as he was starting to move through all of this, and he was actually working with the school in which the trauma had taken place. So at the time, the school was trying to help reconcile what he had gone through while he was simultaneously doing this work with me. And what came out of it was this amazing relationship of wanting to heal back the school where they didn't have the things in place. Like the environment wasn't safe there. There were a lot of things and conditions that weren't in this environment that would, had they been there for him, would not have created the conditions to have the experience that he went through. And it was such a beautiful transformation as he found the things that really stood out for his experience of these practices, where he could feel his mountainness growing. He often described feeling very small. And as we practiced more of these somatic grounding, pendulating practices, he felt the agency of like a bigness kind of coming into him, and the mountain that could kind of weather no matter what and how the school was going to respond or be open to his ideas. And as he started feeling more of that energetic aliveness within him as the transformation and the trauma was leaving his body, the conversations that he was getting, board of directors to have with him, the conversation he was having with, school officials, with the students, with, the whole campus really, and bringing in just such a beautiful discussion about how to really co-create from the healing of the trauma a healthier environment now. And because he could feel what new healthy environment within him could feel like, he knew what that would feel like on the campus. And he's been establishing some ways with them of recent to support bringing actually a place on the grounds, an outdoor space on the grounds, one of which he experienced trauma with, but now wants to create it as a healing space for people to come into, to have these really deep conversations about how academia needs to be more supportive of the student understanding and process, and not have, people in places of power where they might take advantage, and how to have rich dialogues around that and support the growth of that. So, it's been a beautiful, transformation of watching him come into his own full nature, like his own vibrant, healthy nature that was taken from him at a very early age, and then bring it right back to the place where it all originated, and to watch what's now transforming on those grounds and in those relationships and community.
What an amazing, unique story.
Yeah. So, lots of different ways that people, thread their healing into where they're going to, let that ripple effect of the healing go. But I think that is the other piece that I hope does happen, right? If we're waking up to our true nature with the support of nature, and we're more our own sense of well-being, then that can only then establish healthy ecosystems around us, right? And ideally that we start to give that back in whatever direction it feels like it's going to be helpful. Is it our community, our relationships? Is it the environment itself? Maybe we fall so in love with the way that, a vista touched our heart and broke it open and let us heal something super painful in our life we never thought we could, that now we're going to protect the mountains, right? There's ways that which these practices, as they offer the healing insights and transformation to happen, how does it ripple out? Where does it go? And that really is the latter part of the book, and exploring, what does that mean for you? For myself, it's been waking up lots of different traumas in my life, but one of them that I've been really deeply touched by is the pollution in the Central Valley. I grew up in the Central Valley and grew up in a farming community. And as I've been healing my own trauma and doing this work with nature, I'm heartfully connected to the land and to how farming and agriculture can be healthy and establish a sense of potential for healing the climate crisis that we're in. And so because there's been healing for me with that through my own trauma in that land, there's a very alive place in my heart to explore permaculture, to talk about it, to be more involved in how my, relating to the place that still is very actively being traumatized with agricultural pollution, and finding the creative ways to step into new things that we can find for healing with that. But that's out of my own, oh my gosh, I'm so heartbroken and connected to the ways in which we hurt the land because of my lineage. How do we heal that? How do I be a part of that healing of that trauma for myself and for the community? So again, whatever doorway people experience these practices to be healing with, they offer that potential to feel how we can share that back out, so that healing can beget more healing instead of trauma begetting more trauma.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because as most of my listeners know, but us in the ancestral health arena are completely pro-regenerative agriculture. Mm-hmm. It's just for what that does for ecosystems and the environment and everything else, right? The proper land management and the proper treatment and of just farming of animals. And that's why I get all of my meat from Rep Provisions in Oklahoma, who does this. And, there's the Sabre Institute. And thankfully that is getting, and I implore everyone to read a book called The Sacred Cow, which is again about this. We have to move to this regenerative agriculture type of movement, which spawns all of the things you just mentioned, which bleeds out in all these wonderful ways versus all of the taking ways. It's some more of a giving agricultural practice. And it really is back to what we did initially. It's not doing anything different than when we first started. It's just that it's gotten complicated. Then you got the pesticides and, and then it got out of hand. And then we were like, oh, they ruined the land. Now it's a disaster. And so, regenerative agriculture and thank God for these people. And for those out there, you can always go to like eatwild.com or .org, and it gives you a list of like local farmers and people that are adopting these practices so that you can actually support these things with your money, and contribute to the furthering of that. So I'm just really glad you brought that up. That's a very important topic for me. Let's talk. There's a lot of research on this with nature and healing. Let's talk about some of the research out there on this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's, the three categories of research are really respectively in mindfulness, respectively in somatic healing, and then respectively with nature. And so I'll just highlight a few within each of those. My high hope someday is people start doing more of the cross-pollination of the research of mindfulness with nature or somatic with nature, those kinds of things. But we're just not there yet. But on the mindfulness front, I always personally really love, there's so much research these days, but the one that I really kind of geek out on or get really excited about is the way we're actually able to, change literal structures in the body, right? The nervous system reorganizes itself. The cortical structures in our brain begin to change. One of the seminal ones I talk about with trauma that's often dysregulated is the size of our amygdala. Right, that amygdala larger than it should be because it's constantly using the fight, flight, or freeze systems. When we practice more mindfulness, the size of the amygdala shrinks, which is like great news. So then it doesn't have as much active face time to want to kind of run the show. So we can feel more regulated with ease just because we have that size of the amygdala in the correct dimensions that it's designed to be there for us. But another one with mindfulness is like we can actually change the telomeres on our DNA, which the little pokey things that stick out on the helix, those telomeres shrink over the course of our lives and can cause problems depending on how we're managing our stress, our environmental relationships with taking care of our bodies, etc. And what we know when we practice mindfulness is we lengthen them. We actually grow them back. So we're healing the DNA and we're allowing the body to actually come back again into its own right of restoration so that it can work optimally for us and function optimally. On the somatic side of things with research, we know somatic practices have been shown to heal PTSD, anxiety, depression, chronic pain, secondary stress, or traumatic stress, where frontline workers or first responders, can benefit from learning these practices so they're not kind of taking on that extra trauma of other people's experience of going through trauma. And then the nature business, which to me, the more I read about it, the more it feels like research that goes, well, yeah, of course that's what it is.
Right. Like, no, we're not going to be shocked at the outcome of what you're going to say.
And it's like, we need research. Science does. Yes, I guess we do. That does help. But, when the one I love is like, well, when you hear bird song and you hear water, your mood improves. Well, yes. When I sit out here and I listen to my bird friends, or I hear, the lapping of a wave or the trickle of a river, my whole mood just lightens. It releases, right? When we spend, I think it's 10 minutes or maybe even 5 minutes outside, you don't need to do anything. Just stand there. Your stress cortisol levels decrease. So again, like nothing we need to do. You just need to stand in it. Ideally,
even a little sunshine, right? You just get 10 minutes of sunshine on you and just stand there in your yard. Doing a lot for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
and what about this aspect too? I've interviewed a lot of people who've mentioned, I don't know if there were even studies on it, there probably has been, but so when my friends and I are out hiking, and sometimes it can be very dusty, we're always like, ooh, this is good. We're breathing in this stuff. This is good for our immune system. This is like someone I interviewed was like, look, if you could just go like sit by some ferns,
Correct.
go breathe in that air, right?
The wet, moist, fungal, earth, that moist earth. There are studies that show when we breathe that in, we are breathing in the things that stimulate our brain to produce the hormones, chemicals that we need in our brain to help us feel better, manage anxiety, manage depression. It's why forest bathing has become so big in Asia, right? And it actually always has been. It's just become more, I guess, notarized at this point, and people are practicing it and asking their employees and people in the community to spend time in the forest, on the earth, next to the dirt, next to the roots of the trees, because there is something about the fragrance of the earth entering the body that actually is, again, primally wired for our well-being. That's how we survived. That's how we negotiated. We had more subtle senses to know when the rain was coming, right? Because we were attuned to those smells and rhythms and expressions of the way that nature is telling you that that's happening. And so reconnecting to that is absolutely beginning to show us in the research. Again, we're in an infancy stage with that research of just knowing that it's changing chemical expressions in the body and bringing us back into a more restorative state.
And you mentioned the ocean. Oh my gosh, there are 100 free apps for ocean waves. And sometimes I use them. Even I can go to the ocean anytime I want, but sometimes if I'm at home, I will have that sound going because it just, wow, it does something. And so there's ways to really incorporate this without having to go to it, although of course going to it is ideal. One of my favorite people is your publisher, Mark Allen. And so New World Library published your book, right? And so I interviewed Mark not too long ago, but I was a student of his, maybe 7 years ago or so. And his work and his life and his stories have profoundly changed my life. And so one of the things I did after I interviewed him recently was I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to get into his Magical Path online sort of like ongoing course, right? And so we meet twice a month and he's on Zoom with us and he opens every one with a mindfulness sort of meditation, and often they are things about him appreciating nature. Like he'll start by saying, I was taking a walk the other day and I just looked up at this tree, and then he goes on a thing and, you probably know him well enough. And I love it because he's like bringing people back to that wonder, that awareness that, and what an incredible guy as well, who will not sacrifice his peace of mind. He's admittedly like the laziest guy on planet Earth, right? And I that's what I love about him because he found a way to not be type A, to live his life in an easy and relaxed manner. And part of that is his nature immersion, I'm sure, but part of it is just his dedication and intention on achieving it that way. And I love that because it's like he's sort of the ultimate in self-care and self-awareness in terms of like, I don't like to wake up. I don't like Mondays, so I'm not going to do it, and I love that. That's why I try to give every type A person that podcast, because I'm like, you need to listen to this because there's a guy who made a gajillion dollars being the laziest mofo you've ever met in your life. And there's so much to learn from him, right? So I just wanted to bring that up because I do love New World Library books. And I, again, the guy who started it, very, very mindful and very appreciative of nature.
Yeah. And I just appreciate as you're reflecting about your experience with him. I mean, he's embodying the way nature moves, right? Nature is here. She's not worried about what's 10 steps ahead. She's not worried about what 10 steps behind. And she's fully respecting the rhythm that's here to be listened to, right? When it's springtime, when it's summertime, and if we can learn with our practices and with the way that we're waking up to our own nature and our own rhythm, that's, that is the ideal, that we're just really in our own true embodiment of our own nature so that we're fully walking through life in ways that we feel ease and joy and contentment and love and all those beautiful things that it sounds like he expresses and shares.
Aside from what you might have mentioned already, so let's say someone, you mentioned like if they're in the concrete jungle, what they can do, look up, look at that barren tree, and just appreciate where it's come from and connecting your mind in that way to where it all stemmed from. What are some things like if someone's going to go out for a nature trip or they're going to go into the woods, what are some things you would say, hey, here's what I would think about, or here's what you should focus on?
So the first encouragement I would have is to go slow and have no destination. Because we are really good at making projects out of projects. And these practices are meant to just help our nervous systems first slow down, relax, settle in so that we can do the work that, I'm pointing to about healing with trauma. And it could be as simple as, maybe I take a walk in my neighborhood, right? And I go slow. I don't go in my typical way or my typical like, oh, I'm going from A to B. I'm going to check the mail. I'm going
right, just sort of saunter around the neighborhood.
Saunter, meander. What would happen if you stopped instead of getting the walk done? Stop midstream in the walk. If you're allured by something in nature, stop and be with it. Really be present with it. What would happen to take like a breath, to let your eyes, your hearing, your sense of touch really connect with something that you see in nature. Like right now in my backyard, I have these really beautiful spider lilies. They're actually transplants from my grandmother's garden that went to my mother's garden that went to my garden, and they only come up in September. And right now there's one that's just about ready to open her, red buds, really beautiful, delicate flowers that kind of come up, but they're not quite open yet. And, I saunter over to that plant daily and just check out the little different details of each moment that are happening with that. So I'm really present with my sense of seeing. I often touch, right? Feel the little delicate edges. I smell the earth that's rooted and planted in that particular place with that flower. And that's it, right? It doesn't need to be complicated, but to slow down and to really be with and to take your time meandering and whatever. I think that's one thing about these practices that I've come to trust over the years. If something allures you in nature, like it's pulling you towards it, to connect with it in some way, to see it, to touch it, to smell it, maybe you taste it, but that follow that, get intimate with being present with that expression of nature and really watching, like you were just saying that Mark was sharing, like the beautiful way a leaf will touch you in a moment, right? But we have to give ourselves the opportunity to experience that and create the space to experience that, which does require slowing down and being present, letting go of the to-do list, letting go of the need to get to what's next, and just let that carved out time be that carved out time to just be present with yourself and with nature.
I definitely am blessed living where I live. One of the things that's in an abundance around here, you never have to pay for rosemary. There's rosemary, and I love the smell of rosemary. So when we're walking, we'll take a little bit and we're kind of smelling it as we go. And we're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like just that right there is great. And then there's peppercorn trees everywhere and they're so pretty. And that's also another yummy. I love obviously the taste of that, but just sometimes we'll take a few off the ground, crumble them in my hands and smell them. And so it's really, really nice to be able to be exposed to that. And then the other nature thing in my neighborhood, which is a little bit random compared to some other places, is we have hundreds of peacocks, wild peacocks in the neighborhood. And they're hilarious and they honk. And sometimes you open the front door and there's 10 of them and you're like, oh my God. And you have like slam. So there's been a lot of moments of like, holy shit. But they are so beautiful. Their colors, like when I've walked down the street and there's just one with its full feathers on display, it is astounding. Just the colors of that. And even though I can't walk up to it and smell it and touch it. So yeah, I feel very blessed. And also too, God bless them. They eat rattlesnakes. So we don't have any in our neighborhood. And that it's just like the biggest benefit because they're all over my neighborhood in general in the mountains. And so to not have them where we are, I'm so like, yes, come into our yard.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah. But I love all of the different smells. And And yeah, those spider lilies are really beautiful as well. Like you said, you can just have some plants at home, right? You can just get one nice orchid, or, just appreciate that and touch it. So soft, the petals, right? Just that feeling. What are some other things, and sort of closing up, nearing the end here, that maybe haven't been mentioned that you feel are important for us to know about this topic?
I think I would just touch back on the comment earlier about, trauma will beget more trauma. What I mean by that is, unhealed trauma goes on to make more trauma in our life or permeate out onto other people and disrupt the way we want to live in our lives. And so being in a choiceful relationship to say, I want to heal this trauma. I want to figure out how, if the healing of this trauma can happen for me, it will actually beget more healing for others. That's a very powerful thing to get into relationship with, to not see that the trauma is something you need to, be mad at, or to be, you might along the way, but, ideally that over the course of the healing, we're learning to see that by coming into this new relationship and healing our trauma, we really create more healing for ourselves and everyone else around us. And maybe even form a relationship where we can be grateful, appreciative, loving, and, see the beautiful gifts that have come out of our trauma. I think we forget that, we think we need to get on and get through and get over all these things in our lives. And these difficulties, especially these very painful, wounded places in our lives that need our care and attention, like we would offer to anyone else, need our attention too. And when we start to feel the salve and the balm that comes from that, and in relationship with nature, it's just going to permeate out right into the way we can feel ourselves be more alive and helping with other people. So I think that would be the last thing I'd want to say, just that it really is true to get in that choiceful relationship with your trauma so that you can have the choice to have more healing. That's really what's possible.
Yeah, that makes me think of my own, and I wrote a chapter in my second book about this, but I sustained a permanent hand injury when I was 22 and couldn't lift a fork to my mouth. Now I'm fine. I can swim and stuff. I still have the issue, meaning like if I overuse them, I'll probably get an issue, but it was not as debilitating. But the thing about that was the shame and the hiding of that, because I was so embarrassed and so ashamed to be labeled disabled at the time. Now I just don't care. It's a fact. But that created so much more trauma. The shame was more disabling than the freaking disability. And it created a whole nother thing. And it wasn't like until I dealt with that and then finally did. And I looked back and I thought, oh, I wish I would have gotten to that sooner. Now, not know woulda, coulda, shouldas. But I also want to say on the note that you mentioned, which is two of the traumatic experiences in my life, one going through that disability at 22, and then also suffering with hypothyroidism. I have written 2 best-selling books about it and inspired others. They have been the biggest gift I've ever gotten in my life. I would never go back and trade it for anything, right? We can learn so much, and the expansiveness of what a crappy, shitty, awful time can do if you get into it can be life-changing in the best possible ways.
Right. And to trust that that's the story of almost all of us in some way, just like you pointed to, and like what beautiful gifts come out of it. That's what just lights my whole world up, is that if we could have a relationship like this, to choosing to heal and let it transform, wow, we would stop seeing the way that we think trauma is a problem and start seeing that there's a gift here to be given to the rest of the world. And we just have to be in that relationship with it in that skillful way.
Right. Not shuffling it under the rug. I can tell you right now, everybody. I tried it. It doesn't work. It's really, you think you got one up on the universe on that one, but you don't. It backfires every time. So everybody go out and get Healing with Nature, Mindfulness and Somatic Practices to Heal from Trauma. And aside from your book on Amazon, and of course we can go to newworldlibrary.com to get it. Tell us how we can work with you. Tell us where to find you. We'll put everything in the show notes as well. But give us your website and let us know, do you work one-on-one with people? Do you have coaching groups? How can we benefit from your work?
Yeah. So newmindfullife.com is the website where you can go to find out about most everything that I'm up to. A couple of things that are on the horizon, if people are interested in, is in October, first week of October on the 4th. I will be starting an online Healing with Nature 6-week course. So we're going to explore the teachings in the book. And there's a lot of support that I give, not only in the live sessions, but that you get in between the sessions. I've created a course that accompanies you while you're in the course. And so that's a lovely way to stay connected to me. And that's a beautiful growing community. The more people that take that, the more we're having, follow-up groups and different discussions on ways to connect and stay active in the healing practices. And then in November, I'm actually going to be hosting a retreat in New Mexico in Abiquiu at the Ghost Ranch, which is Georgia O'Keeffe's ranch. So anything that you've ever seen of Georgia O'Keeffe and her work, we're going to be sitting in the place where she created all of that work. And so it's a really beautiful, beautiful landscape. And I am in transition within the next 2 weeks. I'm actually moving from San Diego to Taos, New Mexico. So I am going to be out. We actually have land now, and I'll be holding retreats in the coming year on that land in Taos, New Mexico. So
wonderful.
The website will be definite ways to stay up to date on all of that as that's coming.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and for writing this book. It's been a wonderful conversation, and hopefully everyone will get more inspired to be connected with nature.
Thank you so much for having me, Elle.
All right. For everyone else, we'll see you next week. Hey, listeners. Over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.